joined the Army officially. I graduated from high school just prior to Pearl Harbor, which was the following December. And about 2 months later, after going down to the recruiting office in Philadelphia and talking about everybody there and spending days and days, I enjoyed it thoroughly. I finally enlisted in February of 1942.
And where did they send you to train?
Well, interestingly enough, I thought I was going to Randolph Field for flight training. They had assured me that this is what you would do. And I said, that's fine. So my father came down. He didn't go all the prior times I'd been. He wanted to be convinced that I was going to Randolph Field. So he came in and he asked the recruiter, he said, where's my son going? Oh, he's going to flight training at Randolph Field. So.
But what happened?
What happened was, a couple of days later, we're on the train, we're going south. Well, I had listened a little bit when I studied geography, and I thought, well, here we are, we're going south. Randolph Field is maybe that way. So I went over to the sergeant, said, Sergeant, I think we're going the wrong direction for me. He said, what do you mean, soldier? I said, I'm supposed to go to Randolph Field for flight training. He said, oh, no, you'll probably end up in the infantry. I said, really? So that's how it all started.
And where did the train take you?
Well, they took me down to somewhere in Virginia, and that was a nice place, a lot of nice food and everything, and they were trying to determine where they were going to put me, and it was a delightful experience, and I was there for a week or so. They even gave me a little lead, and I went into I forget the town, but anyhow, I met a beautiful lady there, young girl actually, because I was young. I was only 18 then, and now that was my introduction to the military. So I forgot all about flight training because I met some pretty girls, and where we were staying in the barracks, the food was good and everything was nice. But then they said, you're going to be assigned to the topographical engineers. I said, what are topographical engineers? Well, they're map makers. So that was down. I said, what about my basic training? Oh, no, you won't have any basic training. I said, why not? I thought I'd like basic training. Well, you were in the National Guard briefly. You went monthly for a weekend, and you did go on the maneuvers one summer. That's sufficient. You won't have any basic training. And so, you get an awful lot of that pre-training is very important in the military. So I didn't get any basic training. So I ended up in this topographical engineering company, and I thought to myself, why did they put me here? They're all older guys, and they're all college guys, been in college, and not too many people went to college in those days, but almost the whole company were either had 2 or 3 or 4 years of college, had all kinds of degrees, and I'm right out of high school. So first sergeant said the company commander wants to see you, and I went in to see him, and he said, I don't know why they put you here, soldier, but he said, you haven't been to college, you just got out of high school. I think they based it on maybe your high school record, maybe your IQ, but he said, I don't know why they put you here. He said, what do you want to do? I said, I don't know, sir. So it wasn't very exciting though, map making, but it was interesting in a way. But after a short time, I wanted some action. And this was in South Carolina at Fort Jackson. And I think he was kind of hopeful that I would decide I wanted, because he didn't know what to do with me. I just didn't fit in. I didn't have any coursework in engineering and that type of thing. It really would have been a good thing because I'd probably been a staff sergeant. They told me you'll probably be a sergeant or staff sergeant within a year. Everybody had rank, and they're all going to become officers too as soon as they graduated. I would have been in great shape. But he seemed to think that I just didn't have enough interest. So he sent me to Tent City, And now I'm with the 8th Infantry Division, all Southern outfit. And in those days, the Southerners still didn't like the Northerners too well, especially if you're thrown in there with a bunch of foot soldiers who were all Southern boys. And there was only one other Yankee in there besides me, and he was a young guy, and he was rather timid, and they started to beat up on us. Well, I'd been a wrestler in high school, but I hadn't been a boxer, so I got a couple punches that didn't feel so good, but I could weather it because I ended up wrestling with him, and I was better at wrestling than I was boxing. And then I was getting into fights all the time because I was pushed into fights. The other poor guy, he gets beat up horribly. I felt so sorry for him. So then it so happened they had a baseball team that spring, and they were losing all their games. And one of them said, "You ever play baseball?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I was a pitcher." "Oh, we need a pitcher." So I became a pitcher. Well, I had played baseball, and I pitched and played outfield, and I could hit the ball. And then they got to like me because things were looking up a little bit better, not that much, but just the fact I was on their team. So they weren't beating up on me anymore.
How'd you get connected to the Airborne?
Pardon?
How'd you get connected to the 101st?
Well, that's what happened. Most of these were illiterate guys that never read or write, and I would write their letters home to them and all that stuff. Anyhow, I saw a friend of mine who was there, and he said, "Guy," he said, "I'm going to the Airborne." I said, "What's that all about?" He said, "Oh, parachute jumping." He said, "I'm leaving in about 2 weeks." He was from Tennessee. So I went into the orderly room, and I saw this thing, "Join the Airborne," and all that. And so I signed up for it, and man, I was out there. They wanted them bad, so I went to Fort Benning into jump school, and that was in about September of '42. So I'd been all these other places between February and September of the next year. So I went to jump school, and I liked it. It was great, because I was athletic. I'd been in sports and push-ups and running, and that was great stuff to me. A lot of the other guys didn't like it. A lot of them washed out because they couldn't handle the push-ups, and sergeants would get in your face and all that stuff, and I thought it was pretty cool. So we got ready to jump, and there were two guys in front of me, and they were great big guys, and those two guys were our heroes. They had played college football. They had played football for 2 years, big guys, and we were ready to jump, and they were number one and number two to jump out of the plane. We were lined up, and I wasn't frightened, but I was a little apprehensive. I didn't know quite what it was all about, and although by that time I should have known. It was close to jump week, which was the 4th week. So the guy in front of me turned around. He's a big guy, and I looked up at him. He said, "Hey, Whidden," he said, "I'm a little upset about jumping number 2. He said, "You want to jump number 2? I said, "Yeah." But that made me feel good. This big guy, I thought he was my hero, and he's a little squeamish about it. So now I'm number 2, and then the number 1 guy, the other football player, he said, "Whidden," he said, "You're going to have to. I have to go stand in the door first, and nobody in front of me." He said, "I don't know why I want to do that. You want to do it?" I said, "Yeah." So I was number 1 out of the plane. It was great. That's how I got started.
Wow. We just have a couple minutes left before our first break, but your first action was Normandy, correct?
First action, yeah, as far as battle stuff, yeah.
Where were you supposed to be dropped, and where were you dropped?
Well, we were stationed in England. We'd gone to England. We'd been training over there for more than a year, doing essentially the same things we had done back in the States. It was getting rather monotonous, and we knew that something was going to happen soon, and we all wanted to see it happen because we were tired of doing the same thing over and over again. And we were just like automatons. We'd close our eyes and do it. So D-Day happened.
That's right. And so where were you supposed to land, and where did you land?
Well, we were actually, for about 5 days, we were put into a wired, fenced-in area by the airport, and they had guards to keep us from getting out, because if somebody got out, went into London, they would have possibly got to drinking and given away very important information that the Airborne was about ready to do something. So they guarded us in this enclosed area, and but they fed us quite well. Just like, and some of the guys said, "Hey, this is like you're fed before you die. You get a big meal." Like in those days, if a criminal was going to be electrocuted in the electric chair, they gave him a great meal before he died. So we were getting ice cream and steak, things we hadn't had since we came over. They just didn't have it over there, but they had it for us that week. They were really feeding us up good. And we did a lot of things. We boxed and we wrestled, and we looked at the maps that we had. They had an area where you come in there, and they had little buildings and everything which resembled the area that we'd be in, and they could tell us, and then they'd show us where the channel was and just how we were going to fly in and all that sort of thing. So we were pretty well geared to where we were going. So then the time to go was, we started getting...
Guy, let me have you pause right there. We'll pick up the story because I don't want to break up the story. We'll get it in our next segment. We'll be right back with Guy Whidden, veteran of World War II and the 101st Airborne Division, on Veterans Chronicles. Welcome back to Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corumbus, honored to be joined today by World War II veteran Guy Whidden, veteran of the 101st Airborne Division in World War II, and we are just about to hear about his jump into Normandy on the night leading into June 6, 1944. Guy?
If you could hand me my book there, I can use that as I'm talking about it. This book chronicles my whole life, but on the front cover it shows 4 of us standing there. This was about 4 hours before we got on the plane. We were about halfway dressed with gear, but we didn't have all our grenades attached to our belt and our pockets filled with this and that and every which else. We even had 2 cartons of cigarettes that each one carried. I didn't smoke, but I had designed what I was going to do with them, give them out to the French ladies, which never happened because you never saw them when you were in combat. So I gave them out to my buddies. But anyhow, we were standing there about that time, and Eisenhower appeared, and he had, by that time he was talking to officers and higher ups, sergeants, not guys like us because we were lower ranking, but we stood at a distance and watched it all going on. Of course, a lot of guys for years claimed they were in that picture. I never claimed it because I knew I wasn't in the picture, but Eisenhower seemed like such a great guy, and we all got to love Eisenhower. He was a soldier's general. Well, so about 4 hours later, we're lined up at our trains ready to go aloft, and we had to vote as to whether we would smoke aboard or not. If you smoked, the door of the plane would have to be closed completely. The windows would have to be covered, because if they were smoking and we were going over Normandy, they might be able, when they would drag on a cigarette, it might light up, and they seem to think that when we were aloft, that might light the ship up. I don't know how much truth there was to that. Well, my group voted to smoke. So that meant the door would be closed, the windows would be covered, and it was a horrible ride across. Most everybody aboard had taken Dramamine for air sickness. I didn't take any myself. I didn't get air sick. And it would also cause them to sleep maybe, and most of them were sleeping going across. There was activity, but there were some people, the Dramamine wasn't working too well, and they were vomiting and so forth, and the stench was terrible, and the smoke and everything enclosed with all that smoke. Not being a smoker, it was bad. And if they had to go to the bathroom, you can only imagine what happened then. so when we crossed over the channel, we were flying close to the water. Had the door been open like it was proposed for the non-smokers, there would have been a lot of fresh air coming in and so forth. And some of the guys said that you'd even get a splash of the water in some cases if they drifted too close to the water. This was to avoid German radar, plane being low. That's what they told us anyhow. Then when we got to the Jersey Islands, which was right by the peninsula that we were going into to make the jump, we went aloft at that point at the Jersey Islands up to about 1,500 feet. And then it was like a roller coaster all the way in, and then lessening altitude all the way into St. Mary Glees, where we would start jumping. And we were, according to a close friend of mine, Mark Bando, who's authored some books, and he's done a lot of research. He said, "Guy, you were in about the third plane going in," and it so happened that we were the first few planes to go into Normandy. And when we came in, it was starting to be a lot of noise and everything because they were aware we were coming in. There were a lot of them still in bed, the Germans that is, but there was some activity with some of those who weren't sleeping that night. And by the time we got there shortly thereafter, it was like the 4th of July. Planes were coming in. You'd hear one crash, and then everything would light up. There was a lot of machine gun fire going up toward the planes because they were coming in at low levels, and as they jumped out, they'd aim toward the door by which we were exiting the plane. I didn't catch any machine gun bullets because I was in about the 3rd or 4th plane, but those that followed had a lot of problems with that. Because I was on the ground at that time. You'd be in the dark. This is 1 o'clock in the morning. You'd be in the dark 1 minute, and all of a sudden the whole thing would light up. Eventually it got to a point where there was so much fire going on with ground fire and so forth that things were lit up pretty good, and that was 1 o'clock in the morning. And my plane dropped us at 300 feet. How would I know? Because the altitude at which we jumped was reported back to this was the 8th Air Force, so we'd go back to their office, and we would be told later that you jumped at such and such altitude. 300 feet, the chute, by the time it fully opens, you're about 100 feet from the ground, so you're coming in hard. And it's a hard landing, but we were accustomed to it. And unless you hit a hedgerow or something, or land in a tree, or on a picket fence or something, and that would probably destroy you for life, so to speak.
Guy, let's pause right there.
Yeah.
When we come back, our final segment on Veterans Chronicles.
Final segment.
Thanks for listening to Veterans Chronicles on the Radio America Network. I'm Greg Columbus. Thanks for being with us. Honored to be joined today by Guy Whidden, veteran of World War II in the 101st Airborne Division. He was there jumping out with the Screaming Eagles on D-Day, June 6, 1944. Also served in Operation Market Garden. He's also the author of Between the Lines and Beyond, Letters of a 101st Airborne Paratrooper. And Guy, you were just talking about landing in Normandy amidst the chaos there right before you hit the ground right around St. Mary Glees.
Well, what actually happened, I'm in the dark and by myself, and I wondered, there's nobody else around but me. But see, I had been the pusher in the plane, the last guy out, and I remembered that we couldn't get everybody out, so he must have gone from St. Mary Glees, where he started dropping us. He went out over Omaha Beach and came back. This is 1 o'clock in the morning, and then the last of us went. I was the last one out of the plane, so I ended up right outside of St. Mary Glees, and I remember an equipment bundle was oscillating through the air, and they were white, so you could pick them up and get your machine guns and everything else you needed to have. My folding stock carbine was attached to my leg, so that wouldn't be in the bag, but the machine guns would be. And it was oscillating through the air, and apparently it struck me in the head and knocked me out, because those bags could weigh up to 300 or more pounds. And because I woke up I remember waking up and I was all dizzy, and somebody challenged me in the dark with their cricket. Well, I'm already stunned, so I couldn't find my cricket, and I knew I had to find it fast because we were told to shoot a guy if it didn't respond. Then there was a verbal response, and I couldn't remember that because I couldn't find the cricket. So I started yelling, "I'm Guy Whidden. I went to Cheltenham High School, and I was a wrestler, and I was on the school paper, and my girlfriend had red hair." And this guy said, "Well, you crazy," you know, whatever. And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, I almost shot you." He said, but he knew I wasn't a German. So he said, "You better follow me because you can't find your cricket, and so we'll stick together." Turned out he was with the 82nd Airborne. Their mission was to liberate St. Mary Glees, and our mission was to go to the beaches, go in opposite directions, and knock out the big guns out there that might be held against the incoming troops at 6 o'clock coming in on the beaches. We had to knock the big guns out to make it easier for them. So this was Utah Beach. So anyhow, I started going into, with a couple other guys by this time, 101st. We started to go into St. Mary Glees with the 82nd because, well, weren't enough of us 101st Airborne guys to know what direction to go out to where we were to go. So we started in, and you could see 82nd Airborne guys being sucked into the buildings that were on fire. It was horrible to watch. They'd be sucked into these burning buildings. And then all of a sudden one of our guys said, hey, Whid, he said, we just become friends. We're not with the 82nd. We better find some of our guys. So we left to find our guys. So to make a long story short, it all worked out well. And for several days, there was a lot of fighting going on. And we were intermixed with the Germans. One story I remember somebody told me that at nighttime when they'd want to smoke, they'd cover themselves up with a we carried a half a tent with us. We called it a shelter half, I guess we called it. They'd get underneath one of those and they'd drag on their cigarettes. This one guy dropped in and he needed a cigarette, and then he left, and one of the other guys underneath said, "You know what? That was a German." That's how close we were. He dropped in for a cigarette and smoked cigarettes with our Americans. They didn't recognize him, and then he drifted out.
Oh my goodness!
So that's how close we were.
Let me ask you this about St. Mary Glees. One of the most famous images from that is the paratroopers stuck on the church. Did you happen to see that while you were there? Because I think that happened fairly early on.
Well, I didn't get in there until I didn't get into St. Mary Glees, and that did happen, of course. I've been back there a number of times, and they still have they have something hanging up there supposed to resemble him.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now then, of course, after the initial D-Day battle and the immense sacrifice of the Allies in securing the beachhead, there was the Normandy Campaign, which was much more sluggish than our planners thought because of the difficult fighting in hedgerow country. And I know you saw some very intense action.
Well, the biggest loss of life is going toward Carentan. That's where Colonel Cole in our regiment got the Congressional Medal of Honor with his bayonet charge. But going down that road, when the juries there'd be water on both sides. All that land, a lot of that land was inundated, flooded. So you go down the road, and it would be elevated, of course, from where the water was. Sometimes we'd be in the water up to our shoulders to avoid all the mortar rounds that were coming in on the road. They'd zero in on the roads. Occasionally one would land in the water. So some of us, well, then we'd climb up on the road when it slowed down. Then you'd get machine gun fire from little islands out there beyond the road, and then we'd lay down on the road in all the mud and everything, and you could see them almost hit the ground, these tracer bullets coming in, and that's what I remember. And we had a lot of casualties along the road there going in, and but finally Carentan was taken, and there's so much to tell, so little. So do you want me to go on with Holland?
Yeah, absolutely. So after the Normandy campaign, I believe the 101st was taken
Yeah.
out for R&R and then brought back.
Yeah, we
for that.
stayed there after June the 6th. We stayed there until July the 5th. That's when we returned. We did go up toward Cherbourg because there were some pockets of Germans still up there. But then we returned to England on the 5th of July, and then we got some leave time, and I went into London and so forth, and I always stayed in hotels. I never went underground once. The Jerry's up until then had been coming in pretty heavy at nighttime, but that had slowed down, and I'd go up in hotels into the top floor, and you could see everything going on. You could see the bombs dropping. That was early on, though, when they were coming into London there, usually around 9 or 10 o'clock after it got dark. You could hear the roar when they were coming in. It's kind of eerie. But anyhow, then we went into the Netherlands, which we called it Holland, simply Holland. The Netherlands, we always called it Holland. That was a daytime jump. We jumped in there at about noontime, and when I hit the ground, once again I was separated from everybody else. I don't know why. Maybe it was intended that way, so I'd get maybe I divine intervention, because I seemed to be separated in an area where there wasn't any fighting going on. And I get all tangled up in my chute, and all of a sudden I see two guys coming on bicycles toward me, and it didn't dawn on me what they were going to do, and they jumped out and had knives. And at first, then I suddenly realized these are Dutch underground, and they cut me out of my chute and everything and jacked me up on my feet and said, "Go get him, soldier." And I just said, "Thanks a lot," you know. And then I could see tanks, German tanks, way over there in the distance, circling around. They were apparently killing guys that had dropped. They were circling around. That was some distance away. Fortunately, I was in a safer area, and I was all by myself once again.
Now, where were you on that? Because this is obviously the road to Arnhem that was trying to be secured here. Where were you in that progression?
Well, we were there. See, I was there only 2 or 3 days before because we were. Now, what happened? An awful lot of things happened those 2 or 3 days. One time I was running down a road by myself trying to find the rest. I was assistant gunner, and it would be a gunner, and then I'd be 2 ammunition carriers. The gunner was a corporal, I was a PFC, and they were privates. I'm looking for my guys. I've got the machine gun. The other guy, the gunner, he has the tripod. I've got the heavy thing. And I'm running down a road, and then the Germans started to mortar this road, and the roads were kind of elevated over in Holland because of so much water over there, you know. And down below the road were the wheat, and the wheat about that time was 3 or 4 feet high. So in order to avoid being mortared, because I could see these mortars walking down the road toward me, exploding, I slid down that bank into a ditch and then ran through the ditch, and there were little bushes in between. I couldn't see what was ahead of me, but intermittent bushes. I'd dodge around the bushes, and of course there's wheat field over here and the road up here. And all of a sudden this German hit me from the front. He'd been coming the opposite direction, pushed me backwards, and the machine gun landed on my chest, and I'm pinned down. My arms went to my side, and he's on top of me, and I was reaching for my trench knife, which sometimes you'd strap it above your knee. In my case, most times it was below my knee, and I couldn't reach it. About that time, I felt something to my forehead, and I stopped. That was a Luger pointed at me. Had I struggled much more, I might have been dead. And this German looked like a German officer. He's a great, big, tall guy, good-looking guy, because he was eyeballing me, looking straight down at me. And I'm pinned there, so I'm quiet now. And he still had Luger pressed right there. I guess he was deciding what to do with me. But he's a man probably, he was an officer, probably 35 or 40, probably had kids in Berlin or something. Probably I looked like one of his kids. I didn't look very old. So all of a sudden he took the pistol away, and I'm down there, and he handed me the pistol and surrendered. Then he helped me up, and he helped me get my machine gun. then he and I got up on the road together, and then he went like this and surrendered. And I said, forget about it. I'm not worried about you. Of course, we weren't. He couldn't speak English. I couldn't sprechen Sie Deutsch. So he followed me down the road. Of course, I was young and agile. I could go faster, even with the weight of the machine gun. But he kept up with me behind me. Some of my buddies came up on the road and said, hey, Whidden, what are you doing? That German's right behind you. I said, yeah, he's my buddy now. So anyhow, that was one thing that happened over there. And then I know time's short. At best, we were surrounded by Germans. They described it to me as some of those that were hitting us from one direction were actually had come all the way from Normandy. And then the ones on the other side that had us surrounded were the infantry regiments that were there. There were some hardcore elements of the German army there. So they were mortaring us for about 2 hours back and forth, and we were getting decimated. Most everybody was on the ground, either wounded or dead. And I had 3 guys. It looked like I was in charge of my buddies. They didn't know what to do, and I didn't know much more what to do. I noticed our German prisoners we had there that were all on the ground lying there, because if you stood up, you were going to get shrapnel from the exploding mortars, because they were hitting the ground in a pattern back and forth. It was inevitable. So if you lay on the ground, a dead hit will almost have to be a dead hit, but you might suffer from concussion. And I was telling my friends, one of them's the one next to me, Chuck Smollinger, great friend of mine. I said, Chuck, get down. But he would only kneel, and he kept talking. And all of a sudden, this mortar hit us, and I won't describe how it looked, but it killed Chuck right away. And the one kid who was listening to me, he was about 19 years old, 18. He was a replacement. He was wounded, and the other fella, he wouldn't get down. He was killed. So I looked down at my boot, because in my boot, my boot was blown right off, and my tibia was exposed, but minimal bleeding. You know, the wound was probably seared by the heat of the metal. So I just put some sulfa powder over it and wrapped it up, and I didn't feel any pain at that moment. And then the young kid, he had a similar wound, but he was also wounded in other parts of his body. He had been closer to the exploding, and so he did get shrapnel, and he was in a lot of pain. I dressed him up, and I gave him. We carried morphine, so I plunged some morphine in, squeezed it out, morphine syrettes we called them, to give him pain relief. But he died. So all 3 of them died but me. I'm crawling along the ground, and there was hardly anybody standing at that moment. So that went on for some time. The only other thing I can remember, there's so many things I could talk about. Earlier in the day, I was by myself again. I don't know why I was always by myself, and I came up behind this little couple of trees there, and all out in front you could look for several hundred, probably a quarter of a mile of wheat, and it was like 4 feet high. That's about as high as wheat will grow. And they were conferring as to whether there were any Germans out there, and these officers and NCOs. I was the only private. I didn't know them, they didn't know me. And I said something about the only way we'll ever find out is to go out there to see. So one of the officers turned around, okay, he said, private, like you're a smart-ass private. Here, you can go out and find out where they are, whether there's any out there. So they improvised a little flag with the limb of the tree, and I think he had a yellow cloth, which is good to use. And I went out through the wheat field by myself while they stayed back behind the trees. And I went about 150 meters out through there, and all of a sudden this tall German officer stood up, and then behind him a lot of soldiers started popping out of the wheat field. And he started toward me. Of course, I had my folding stock carbine over my shoulders because I didn't want to look threatening to him because he was surrendering. And he came toward me, and I saw that nice Luger pistol and some of those things he had strapped to him, and I wanted them in the worst way. But he was looking not at me. He knew that I was the one doing the work, and these other guys were back there. He went on past me, not even eyeballing me. The other soldiers that followed him, they would look at me. They weren't smiling or anything. They didn't look too, I don't know how they felt, but there was a slew of them. They went back there, and that's the last I saw of them. I never got a thank you for that because they didn't. The officers, they didn't know who I was. So I went on my way trying to find my buddies. But that was interesting little thing that happened.
So the injury you talked about before, is that the one that took you out of combat?
Yeah. I didn't get any medical attention for about 7 or 8 days. They took us to a hospital in Eindhoven, and it was so filled, they put us outside under a tent, and then they started mortaring the tent area, and guys were getting wounded and killed again. They were just lying there ready to be treated. Then they put us down in a basement later on in the dark. It was in the dark, and guys were dying in the dark there, and nobody was being treated there. A few days later, they shipped some of us out, and then they tagged us. If you're going to cut your leg off below the knee, they put a tag above the knee, cut the leg off below the knees. So I asked somebody, what are they going to do to me? He said, oh, you're going to lose your right leg above your ankle. Oh, that doesn't sound too good. So finally, I had to go, and I had that Luger, this German surrendered to me, in my belt. So when I went in there to have my leg cut off, these guys that were working there, and this was in a pretty safe area by this time. This is 7 or 8 days later. Gangrene or something had set in. That's why they wanted to cut it off. It wasn't gangrene, but it was something close to that. They said, what do you want for your Luger? And I said, I don't want to sell it. He said, well, you're going to be put under. They're going to cut your leg off, and then you won't have it when you wake up. So anyhow, this officer said, okay. He said, get ready. He said, I'm going to put you under, and we're going to cut your leg off. I said, sir, I know you're an officer, sir, but I don't want my leg cut off. He said, I am an officer, and you are going to have your leg cut off. I said, I don't think so, sir. This is my leg. And he thought a minute. Okay, he said, you're going to have to bite the bullet. So I don't know, I stuck something in my mouth, I think, and man, it didn't feel too good. But he treated that, and he obviously did a good job. Got all that, cleaned it all up and everything. So I've always felt like I owed him something. He took the time, but they were understaffed, and it was easier to amputate than it was to try to preserve. So many guys got amputated, should have been amputated. My one buddy there, he was blinded, and he would have had a boxing and football scholarship in Ohio at some university, and he was screaming because he knew he was blind for life. And a couple of my other buddies were all messed up. It was a bad experience, yeah.
Last minute or so in our conversation,
yeah.
Mr. Whidden, when you think back to your service, what are you most proud of?
How do I look back on it?
What are you most proud of?
Well, I always wanted to go to West Point. I didn't talk about that. I had an appointment that would have worked out of high school, but I dropped it, to come in the military. I wanted to go to West Point, and I got a field appointment out of Normandy to go to West Point. But I was packing, getting ready to go. They found out I was 10 days too old. It was an age limit, so I didn't get to go, and I never got to go to West Point. That was a big disappointment. But there were a lot of things you gained by all that experience that are positive things. It made me more aggressive in life. It made me feel, when I was young, I felt rather inadequate, you know what I mean? Because I had a grandfather and a father who were very strict but good. but they didn't like crying. They told me I should never cry. I never cried until just before my wife died. And I find that crying's very good because I cry now once in a while. It makes me feel better. But I didn't cry all those years. You know, and restraining all that is tough. And they say I suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, but my only problem, I love people, but even up to my age, if they really get in my face and get pushy, I forget that I'm old.
Well, you look great, and we thank you for coming in.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for your service to our country. And I know that after the war, you spent decades as a teacher, and that was a great...
Yeah, I enjoyed that. That was a great experience. I enjoyed teaching and coaching.
Fantastic. Guy, thank you again for being with us.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Guy Whidden is a veteran of World War II, 101st Airborne Division in the U.S. Army. The book is Between the Lines and Beyond, Letters of a 101st Airborne Paratrooper. I'm Greg Columbus. This has been Veterans Chronicles.